what is mercy? The word mercy is a beautiful word, right? The word mercy comes from rachamim, it comes from rechem, which means womb. Mercy is the idea, not that I'm going to not have justice in the world, is I'm just delaying justice enough so that you can repair the damage yourself. And if you repair the damage yourself, we'll pretend like a mistake never happened. And that's what, again, why does it mean a womb? Because what happens in a womb is that a baby develops, right? There's time for development. As Rabbi Tatz like say, the word rechem comes from the word machar, the same letters as machar, which means tomorrow. We're going to look at things tomorrow. And what's going to happen between today and tomorrow? Well, let's see if there's any change. And if I believe that you can change, then I'll give you till tomorrow. And so again, that's another aspect of this ingredient. That's not just about having good energy in the world. It's about who are we directing it towards. Is it towards a person who's going to use that good energy and actually use it to change who they are?
This is the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish perspective podcast, where we take ambiguous moral situations in fictional popular movies and TV shows and analyze them from a Torah lens.
3 is always, it's a chazaka now, that's it. I'm going to put on my calendar at least once a year now.
That's right, let's do it. So not only is it round 3, we're also revisiting Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is awesome. And also, this is also the 3rd time I'm doing Lord of the Rings. I've done Harry Potter twice. There are things I've done twice, but I think we're both big fans of Lord of the Rings, so I'm pretty excited about this.
So there's a lot to do, a lot to uncover, a lot to discover. So
that's true. And there's also a lot to hit upon on this topic. It's, as we were talking about before, there's a lot to discuss here. And so just again, to kind of set the stage. So the question is, so the issue we're going to be resolving is, was it appropriate for Frodo to show Gollum mercy? And perhaps more specifically, Tolkien harps a lot on this idea that the fact that Frodo showed mercy, Bilbo showed Gollum mercy, Sam even showed Gollum mercy, the fact that there was all this mercy put out in the world is effectively what allowed the quest to be achieved. Right? That's effectively what happened. And again, just a quick summary. There's the One Ring, right? Sauron is the big bad guy. He has this all-powerful ring and is trying to get it back. Gollum used to have the ring. He lost it. It ends up in Frodo's hands, and then Gollum finds Frodo and wants to kill him to get back the ring. But effectively, after Frodo and Sam overwhelm Gollum and get him subdued, Frodo decides not to kill Gollum because he pities him. He's this kind of weak, pitiful, kind of Nebuch-looking creature. And he's like, you know what? Let's just let him live. And he'll also serve as our guide. So there's also a practical element here. Like, Gollum has been to Mordor, and Gollum can lead them to where Frodo and Sam need to get to destroy the ring, right? So there's a practical element here. That's the background. But as you can imagine, there's a bit of a moral dilemma of, was that appropriate for Frodo to do? Yes, it worked out well in the end. But again, that's because
Tolkien, he did lose a finger, to be clear. But yes,
right, that's true. That is true. That's true. Frodo lost a finger, but ultimately the quest was achieved. But again, this is also important to realize that these are not real events. It's fiction. And therefore Tolkien can do whatever he wants to teach the lessons that he wants. So our question is twofold. First, what is the Jewish view of pity and mercy? And would the Torah advise Frodo to show that pity or mercy to Gollum in that situation? That's one. And then two, and perhaps more critically, is, do we believe in this idea that let's just put out good energy into the world, even potentially when irresponsible, and then good things are going to come back to us? You do good, and then good things will happen. What if it's irresponsible to do good? Doesn't matter. Still good things will happen to you. Those are the two critical questions we're looking to cover here.
Well, the Torah certainly has quite a bit of discussion on this topic. This is a fundamental topic for mankind. And we'll take a look at, I think, a few different responses. I think, in general, the answer is not quite as always, right? Judaism is going to have a nuanced take on it. And the answer is essentially no, with a caveat, with certainly some caveats.
Sorry, no what?
No, that I don't think that, just being merciful and loving and kind 24/7 is going to lead, no matter what, to that kindness coming back to you at all times. In fact, we see many, many moments, both in past history and today, which we'll talk about, that shows that's certainly 100% not true. And that's not what we are. We are, again, our perspective in life is always this interesting blend of head and heart. Heart without the head in Judaism is they describe it as clownish, which means like this, that it says that in Kabbalah that your brain is called your moach, your heart's a lave, and then the kaved, the liver, is the area where it processes all the blood, the most physical part of you. So it says when you have your head first, then your heart, and then your liver in that order, you are a melech, you're a king, you're in control, you're leading a good life. But if you put your heart first and just all whatever we call this energy or love first, you're a lemach, it's clownish or foolish. And so we have to put the blend together. That being said, we know all over the place that if you take the heart out of things and you are just intellectual, you're also missing something. So we really need to balance it out in a very delicate way. Every circumstance, you have to know the exact details of what that circumstance is to know how to apply the right level of mercy. And there will be times it will appear that we have to be almost completely merciful. But that being said, very rarely. And in general, there has to be this really delicate balance of when to be merciful and when we have to employ some level of what we call justice. And it would be foolish to not carry out some level of justice. So we'll see a few examples of that.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful introduction. Right, let's see where we go.
So I guess a couple thoughts to start. Just a few examples in Jewish history, both way past and I think right now. Should we start past or now? Okay, we'll start in the past. So there was the first big story that we have to examine is the story of, and I think it really has a similarity to Gollum here, that why was the second temple destroyed? And the general story, there's many reasons given, a lot of kind of spiritual rot leading up to it, but the story that the Talmud likes to focus in on is this complex story of a Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, where there's a person having a party, and he asks a servant to invite his friend Kamsa. He accidentally invites Bar Kamsa, who was his enemy, who he didn't want at the party ostensibly. And long story short, I won't get into the whole story, but he ends up kicking out this Bar Kamsa from the story, even though Bar Kamsa begged him, "I'll pay for half the party, just don't embarrass me in public." Nonetheless, he doesn't listen. He's kind of merciless towards his Bar Kamsa. And there were rabbis and high society at this party. And so Bar Kamsa, who was Jewish, goes on a rampage. And he says, that's it. I'm going to the Roman authorities and I'm going to get this class of Jews in trouble. And so that's what he does. And at a certain point, when he's going to kind of basically frame the Jews, he tells the Romans, go try to bring a sacrifice to the Jewish temple and see if they do it. And you're going to see that they're not going to do it. And in order to kind of make sure the Jews don't do it, he actually blemishes the animal himself to kind of frame the Jews as kind of rebelling against the Romans. And basically what happens over there, the story goes that at a certain point, the sages got wise that this Bar Kamsa is basically, if he is successful in his quest to frame the Jews, we're going to be in tremendous trouble. And they suggest that the leader of the community should try him and basically kill him, that Bar Kamsa should be killed. And it says, so the sages, the majority of sages sought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. The majority said, we got to kill this guy. He's what we call in Judaism, basically what we call a rodef, which is the idea if someone's trying to kill you, you are certainly allowed to kill them first. And basically Rabbi Zechariah, who was one of the leaders at the time, decided this was a bridge too far. He didn't technically do anything that would merit the death penalty in Judaism. And so we can't do it. We cannot kill his Bar Kamsa. And so Bar Kamsa's plan succeeds, essentially. And the Romans, that's what the proximate cause of what leads the Romans to come and destroy the temple and kill really millions of Jews. So that's one example in Jewish history where the leader decided to be slightly merciful towards someone that clearly had bad intentions. And it wasn't like a direct, again, so there's two kind of, there's a little complexity here. There's what's called a rodef. In Judaism, a rodef is that if someone's actively trying to kill you, you are allowed to stop them. And, or actually rodef is pursuing, let's say a third person, someone trying to kill, person two trying to kill person three, and you see this happening, unfolding, you're allowed to kill person two. to stop them from killing person 3. But in that case, in the case of road death, they're in a case of active pursuit of somebody. They're in the middle of the act. If they're not in the middle of the act, you technically shouldn't kill them. That would not be called road death. However, there's another Jewish principle, which is what we call the case of someone who's coming to tunnel into your home, and they're coming just to steal, seemingly. So they're not trying to kill you. That being said, the Talmud says, well, once they're tunneling into your home, it's going to lead to a potential of a type of fracas fight that could lead to endangerment. And in that case, you are allowed, in certain circumstances, to kill them first. All right? And that's the general principle. Someone who's coming to kill you, you're allowed to kill them first. And so those are two slightly different principles, but that's what we're dealing with here. And so therefore, the sages decided that we should kill this guy. He's coming to essentially cause the destruction of all of us. But one of the rabbis stayed their hand, and the Talmud criticizes and says the excessive humility, it's an interesting word, humility, of Zacharias led to the destruction of the temple. And so that's, I think, one point over here that Judaism doesn't see it always as a virtue that, let's just be sweet. And we have to see where Bar Kokhba is coming from. He was really hurt. He's in emotional pain. We have to take that into account. He's been triggered. Only so far.
Interesting. Okay, so here that's like an anti-mercy, like in terms of we do not think that mercy was appropriately shown. It's interesting that it does call it humility instead of mercy. It doesn't say the excessive mercy; it's excessive humility. I'm sure there's a lot to say there, but I think unless it does that, like go into humility and mercy. And any?
I mean, I guess we know, right? We know that being a judge, being someone that feels they can decide someone's life requires a certain amount of self-confidence, a certain amount of self-assurance. And I think feeling like, who am I to decide? Who am I to know? Only God can be the judge. And that's true in a deepest sense. That is correct. Only God is the true judge. And we'll maybe discuss later a case like that as well. But that being said, there are certain human circumstances where we have to take action. We have to be the judge. And if a character like Gollum, which clearly has malintent, is only going to cause damage long term, we have to act appropriately.
I mean, I can't not cite what Gandalf says. That's so funny that you said that, because in the movie, it's slightly different in the books. Like the movie condensed it. Yeah. But when Frodo says it's a pity Bilbo did not kill him when he had the chance, Gandalf says pity. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death. Some die that deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends.
Yeah,
we disagree with that. It sounds like.
So let's again. We're going to see in this discussion that we can't say we disagree almost on or agree on anything, because every case is radically nuanced. So I'll give you an example that kind of does support a little bit of what Gandalf is saying. We have another case of seeming type of road death, a type, again, pursuer, where people feel like their life is being put in danger. This is the famous case of Yosef and his brothers. And what was going on there? So Yosef was essentially tattletaling on the brothers and saying that they were not of a spiritual caliber that, befitted the future Jewish people. And all debate what exactly he interpreting correctly or incorrectly. Sounds like, according to Yosef's really high spiritual level, maybe he was correct that the brothers weren't on that level. That being said, they were certainly not on the level he thought they were, meaning at a low level. So that being said, the brothers were getting fed up. And then after he has his dreams and says they're going to be bowing down to him, at a certain point, there's the straw that broke the camel's back. And they say, that's it. This Yosef is endangering us, essentially, spiritually. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, certainly. And we have to take care of him. And the judge and the brothers decide that, okay, we're going to have to kill our brother. At the last second, though, they realize, you know what? Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe we're jumping the gun. Do we know for sure that he deserves death? We're pretty sure. But let's do something else. Let's, in a sense, let God decide. So we're going to throw him into a pit, famously that says the pit had no water in it. And the Torah asks, why do we care if it had water? It didn't have water. And the answer is, it's telling you it didn't have water, but it did have other things, which are snakes and scorpions. I believe it's Or Chaim that says famously that The reason why they did it that way is like, you know what? Let's let nature decide whether Yosef deserves death. Nature, aka God. If he deserves death, the snakes and scorpions, they'll overtake him and they will kill him. If, however, he does not deserve death, then nature does not have the power to vanquish a human life unless it's decreed. And so let's let kind of God decide his fate. And that's what they do. Throw him into the pit, and we all know the rest of the story, that he does get out and he is saved and ends up in Egypt. And again, so in that case, on some level, the fact that they didn't kill him, that pity that they showed at the last second not to kill him, that type of pity, does end up being that which saves them in Egypt, right? Because as you know, Egypt, Canaan is ravished with the famine, and it's Yosef who saves the day. So we certainly do have certain cases where, it's warranted to be very careful whether to mete out any type of judgment, especially of a murderous kind.
What's also interesting about that case, I'll say, is that there, kind of almost the tie-in, is the fact that the brothers were also counting on God to step in, right? In terms of this whole idea of divine providence. If Yosef is destined to die, then that's what's going to happen. We're counting on God to kind of like tie up loose ends, if we will. Like he's like, I mean, that sounds kind of interesting. That's a really interesting example.
Yeah, so I think this would be a kind of pro Gandalf, pro slightly Tolkien-esque element. But again, we have to remember the type of danger they were in was certainly not physical.
Right. I actually heard that, look, one explanation of, look, why did the brothers feel so threatened by Yosef? And I heard this explanation that it was because if you look at the previous generations, right, with Avraham, right, the first of the Avos, he had two sons. He had Yitzchak and Esav. And Esav was kind of like dishonorably discharged from the Jewish people, right? He's not Jewish. And then it continued through Yitzchak, Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Yaakov, Jacob, and Esav. And there too, again, Esav was dishonorably discharged from the Jewish people, and the Judaism continued only through Yaakov. And then now we have Yosef and the brothers, and Yosef is suddenly saying, "Oh, look, I'm the king. You're all going to bow to me." And he's also tattling on them. And the brothers are like, "Hey, whoa! This is not like, you're not going to kick us out of the Jewish people, buddy." And so that is, and I heard that when I heard that was the nature of the threat, you're like, "Whoa!" Like, now you can almost understand the brothers
for sure. They
really
had a real claim. They had a real claim. And Yosef had made a mistake. That's why God tells him, like, he goes through a lot of difficulties. He did jump the gun on how he viewed his brothers. So there were certainly, both sides kind of had an element that was wrong. But that's correct. Yeah, they viewed Ishmael. They saw Ishmael. They saw Esau. They saw this was a real danger, and they had to act on some level. So again, that's another example, I guess, a somewhat pro-pity. Obviously, other examples of pro-pity. We have Avraham, who's, again, it's one of the most astounding stories in the whole Torah, that Avraham, who stood for loving kindness, he stood up and really put God to the test to say, hey, you're going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? And again, those societies were antithetical to his own belief system. And yet he still stood up for them. But again, we remember over there, he wasn't standing up for the evil people really there. He was, even in that case, when the pity was done with discernment. It was, are there some righteous people, enough righteous people in that town that could turn around the town at some point? Is there any redemptive quality? Can they turn it around? And that's another point, I think, with Gollum, that we have to ask ourselves. Well, that we talk a lot of in Judaism about the spark, the little spark, the Pintaliyad, the spark of the Jew, that can be, fanned into a flame. There's always some goodness there that can turn things around. And we have to ask ourselves, they say about psychopaths, for example, in the literature, that there's a tiny percentage. I had a professor in my mental health master's, and he was, I like to think of him like the Mr. Miyagi of psychology, very wise, just really impressive person, very put together, really believed in people, and just really believed strongly. And if you believe in people, they will turn things around. And even he was like, that's true for 99% of people. But there is that 1%, that the psychopath, who really has that complete shutdown of any empathetic component in his body. where it's too far, and you really can't turn them around. And for that type of person, you really can't. Showing mercy for them is not going to get you. Because remember, we have to remember what is mercy. The word mercy is a beautiful word, right? The word mercy comes from rachamim, it comes from rechem, which means womb. Mercy is the idea, not that I'm going to not have justice in the world, is I'm just delaying justice enough so that you can repair the damage yourself. And if you repair the damage yourself, we'll pretend like the mistake never happened. And that's what, again, why does it mean a womb? Because what happens in a womb is that a baby develops, right? There's time for development. As Rabbi Tatz like say, the word rechem comes from the word machar, same letters as machar, which means tomorrow. We're going to look at things tomorrow. And what's going to happen between today and tomorrow? Well, let's see if there's any change. And if I believe that you can change, then I'll give you till tomorrow. And so again, that's another aspect of this ingredient. That's not just about having good energy in the world. It's about who are we directing it towards. Is it towards a person who's going to use that good energy and actually use it to change who they are? And so we have, and again, in Lord of the Rings, very interesting is that you have many characters who are corrupted, but come back, right? You have Boromir, right, who has his difficult struggles, ends up coming back. You even have, even at the end with the Denethor, when he gets killed, the last second he also has that, what we call a thought of tshuva, that last level of, that last second clarity that can be, okay, I realized that what I did was a mistake, right? You have, in the Hobbit, you have the King Dwarf who gets corrupted. I'm blanking on his name, which I'm old about. I have to do tshuva for. But okay, but the right, he also comes around. Thorin.
So Thorin, yeah, nice. I was also blanking. Let's go.
Yeah, Thorin Oakenshield. Yeah, of course. So Thorin also comes around, right? All these characters, right? We have this like redemptive quality. Everyone can come back, even if they're in the pits of despair. It's not clear Gollum fits that. He doesn't, but he plays the part. He does play the part of the poor pity. He does try to elicit that pity all the time. He's really a master manipulator in that sense, but I think he's a master manipulator from the path of the psychopath, in the sense that there's no one home, there's no redemptive quality to Gollum. And so it would be hard to say like this would be a wise person to spend your mercy on.
I will say it's kind of interesting, just because since we're already like talking about Lord of the Rings, I will say I didn't know how to bring this up, because there's a lot of discussion about Gollum and Smeagol and whether or not he was capable of redemption. I think even Tolkien spoke about it. And I was debating, I was like, how deep into Lord of the Rings lore do we want to go? But the general, just again, because if there are any Lord of the Rings fans who know better, then I suspect I might get some hate mail. They're really passionate about it. And it's like, this is the topic at hand. The way they effectively frame it was Gollum was kind of slowly being transformed to Smeagol, and was actually on the path, I guess you could say, of like being redeemed. And then there's that moment where Faramir wanted to trap Gollum or threatened to kill him, and Gollum, like Smeagol, kind of trusted Frodo, and then the Gondorians all jump on Gollum, and like Gollum feels deceived by Frodo. That was understood to be the turning point. And again, I think like I did do a fairly deep dive on this, but it seemed like Tolkien was like, if they were like Frodo was able to work all the way through with Smeagol, he would have come back. But because there was that inner deception, at that point, Gollum was like the point of no return, and like he had completely shut down Smeagol, and now he was just being manipulative and was effectively completely off. But there are those who say, both the fans and I think even Tolkien himself said, that they were doing well and Frodo was putting him in a good place. There's a lot on this topic, and I was like, I like Lord of the Rings, but I'm not as like deep in the weeds when it comes to these details as I think a lot of the fandom is. But I thought it was just interesting. Like, was he capable? Was he not? Tolkien seems to say that he was able, if you had just been like, if you were able to see it through all the way. But
right, yeah. something to consider, something to think about as we decide what was the right thing for Bilbo and Frodo to do. Certainly, I think when they encountered Gollum and he was kind of in his wretched state, it was hard to see for sure.
And also, like when Gollum first met them, like he was clearly strangling Sam to kill him. He was there to deal death onto Frodo and Sam.
Yes, right. So that'd be a case of someone who's coming to kill you. You certainly can arise and kill them. And I think that is an important principle that we have to act. And let's go through a couple more examples of where we see how important that is. And two very recent, relevant examples to the time period. One being, again, Purim time. The most difficult mitzvah in the Torah. It's controversial in the Torah. Certainly the idea of erasing the concept of Amalek. Amalek is a nation that is kind of the anti-Jew, right? There has to be a kind of a Star Wars balance in the Force. So again, if there's an amazing Jewish prophet named Moses, we need an amazing non-Jewish prophet named Bilam. We have an amazing people called the Jewish people. We need to have the antithesis to it called Amalek, which is the opposite. The Jewish people stand for meaning and love and purpose. Amalek stands for randomness, evil, cruelty. That's kind of how it's understood. And so there's a mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. Of no one should sharpen their swords. Rav Hirsch and others talk about how nowadays it's the idea of Amalek that we're branded. It's an ideology, not a person. The ideology again of Amalek is this idea that the word Amalek is the gematria of Safek, which means doubt. It's a people that again want to promote that the world is just random. There is no purpose in it. It's a nihilistic vision of life. And so we have to get rid of that. That's no question. That's part of the Jewish mission. Let's get rid of nihilism. We have to see everything's purposeful and amazing. So in any case,
just as a quick analogy, and we can go right back to this, but I think a good analogy to that is the Joker in The Dark Knight, played by Heath Ledger, in terms of, I just do things, right? I'm like a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do if I caught it. Or the fact that he wants Batman.
Are we mixing movies on Dilemmas on Screen? Is that what I'm doing right now?
So we are.
Is this a legal move? One movie at a time over here. Wow. Okay. Well, I guess you created it. So
you did bring up Star Wars.
Yeah, so true. Okay, I was guilty first. Moscow. Okay.
But again, then we could just go back. Just in case people struggle to understand what this might look like when the Joker was when Batman's like, that's my one rule. I don't kill people. And then the Joker's like, that's the one rule you'll have to break. I think that is not a perfect, but a very good analogy for Amalek. Our job is just to make sure I'm just doing things. I don't even know what I'm doing. You're just a plotter and a schemer. You're trying to get things done. You have morals. My job is for you to break your morals. What if I die? I'm cool with dying as long as you break your morals. Anyway, sorry.
100%.
Back to the topic.
Very, very, very parallel. So in any case, they say the roots of the Purim story stem from, now we know that Haman was an Amaleki. He described as an Amalekite. And that he was also an Agagi. He was an Agagite. Who was Agag? Agag was his great grandfather, double check, who was the king of Amalek. And we know that there was a mitzvah for Shaul, the first king of Israel, to take care of Amalek. And actually, he did it in a physical way. It wasn't an ideology at the time. It was actually a real people. Again, we have to understand it, with the only way our modern minds can possibly grapple with this idea. The old question, if you meet a baby and it's Hitler, do you kill the baby? And, I think, unfortunately, knowing what Hitler did, and you knew for a fact, right? God tells you this baby will be Hitler. I think, that's the analogy here. That's basically what is said about Amalek. So in that case, Shaul does not complete the job. He has a little bit of mercy at the end and doesn't kill the king right away. And that night, the king is able to escape and have a child, and that child ends up being Haman, who was basically the historical equivalent of Hitler. So we know that this is a famous example of where there was a bit of mercy on Shaul's angle. He loses the kingship over this because it says he made a tremendous mistake in not following what Hashem wanted. And over this one mistake of being whatever it was that stayed his hand, slight pity, and ends up nearly annihilating the entire Jewish people. And in fact, the Midrash says this explicitly in Midrash Kohelet, that sure enough, right, that don't think you are smarter, don't be a bigger tzaddik from the Creator. And right, that this will end up being someone who is loving to the cruel, will be a rachaman. If you have mercy towards the cruel will end up hurting the merciful over time. And that's what we worry about, that in this case, if we're overly merciful, it's going to end up not putting positive energy back, quite the opposite. It's actually going to lead to negative energy, hurting the loving people.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty on point source. I will say, there was another midrash, I think it was in Bamid Baraba, which seems to articulate a very similar idea. But there they focus on King David, that he did obviously nothing to the same degree as Shaul's mistake. They said, I wish I had the exact quote, but effectively, like, if you act with kindness, they don't say mercy. Interestingly, I think it was kindness. Like, if you act with kindness towards the where it's like not where it's not appropriate. Again, this was like your source is much more important in terms of, if you act with mercy towards the cruel, then you'll end up acting like with cruelty towards the merciful, or there will be cruelty towards the merciful, something like that. This is more like, if you act kindly to the cruel or to people who don't deserve it, then like there's going to be some really negative blowback. I will say, I was thinking a lot about this because this seems to be like directly on point in terms of literally answers our question.
I think so. I think this is kind of the best way to articulate it. And this was redacted. This is said in many different aspects throughout history. In Aesop's Fables of the famous story of the scorpion asked the frog to carry him across the river. And then the frog hesitated. I don't trust you. You're going to sting me. And sure enough, the scorpion promises, but at the end, the frog buys into it and takes, has pity on the scorpion, takes him across the river, and then the scorpion stings him and says, what do you want from me? This is my nature. I can't do against my nature over time. So again, this concept has been floated around in different versions.
Just to specify, because I remember now, so in Bamidbar, the quote is, what King David did was he showed kindness. So there's a mitzvah in the Torah not to show kindness to, I think, Moab and Ammon, right? And we're not supposed to be kind to them because of what they did to them. They didn't host us properly. They weren't kind to us, so we don't do kindness to them. And David did do kindness to them. And so what the source is saying is like, I told you not to do kindness. Why would you do that? Like, if you do kindness to other people, then like bad things will happen to you. And then again, it quotes another story in Tanakh where it shows that in fact bad things ended up happening. Now, what I think is a sensitive point, and because I was thinking a lot about this, I'm like, this literally answers our question directly. Is there some like mitigation here? And I think because of those two sources, and I think there are more, but those are the two I saw. What's interesting about those is that when it comes to Shaul was commanded directly by God to wipe out Amalek. Again, this is really sensitive. This is not like, we do not do this now. Don't sharpen your swords. But like, it's like man, woman, and child, all of the animals, wipe them out. Right? That's what Shaul was directly told this by God, or through a Navi, but the point is, it was a direct divine command. With King David, this isn't directly to King David, it's just a mitzvah in the Torah for everyone, but the Torah says, don't show kindness. And then David, again, kind of like didn't follow the Torah, was just not obeying the divine command. So here again, there's a contrast between Shaul and David, who didn't obey a direct command from God, as opposed to, again, like Lahavdil, but Frodo. Frodo wasn't told what to do. He just acted with mercy. So there, I wonder if that actually creates a bit of a difference in terms of, for Shaul and David, it was clear as day what they were supposed to do, and they showed mercy where it was as inappropriate as can be. They were told not to show mercy by God, and they did. Whereas with Frodo, it's a little more nebulous, right? He doesn't have instruction. So any comment on that?
Great question. So it is more nebulous, right? Frodo didn't have a direct command that he's going against what to do in this case. But there is a certain amount of what we call das, which is discernment that we have to make in these cases. Similarly, a slightly different scenario, but again, the same outcome. So again, we see this theme in the Torah all the time, is that when the Jews are leaving Egypt, a lot of Egyptian converts come along, and God's not so into them, but Moshe advocates for them against them. Once again, I don't know if it was a direct command from God not to take them, but God was not for it. And Moshe again overrides, says, no, we should take them into our people. And they're the catalyst shortly thereafter in building the golden calf, which again leads to tremendous destructive activity. So again, once again, Moshe showing extra mercy towards these potential converts. You can imagine these Egyptians saying, hey, please take us with you. We didn't agree with Pharaoh, and we're so amazed what's going on. And God's like, I don't know. Think twice before you do this. and ends up again in a negative way. So again, maybe you'll say that's another case of a command, but I think there wasn't quite a command by God, but it was again a case of more of discernment of what to do, and Moshe chose seemingly poorly in that case. And throughout history, I've heard Kabbalists say that the Eruv, what they call the Eruv, the mixed multitude of converts are the ones that always kind of give the Jews trouble from within the Jewish people, who had plenty of self-hating Jews, Kapo type people, and they all descend from that spiritual root. So again, we see that once again a case of misplaced mercy can be quite destructive. But and I think in the case of Frodo, I think we're pretty firmly in the camp of someone who's coming to kill you. You should stand up and protect yourself. I think that would fall into that camp, as we see several times when Gollum frames Sam and throws out. I mean, Gollum essentially kills them in two ways. Right? He throws out all their lembas, all of their elven bread, throws it out, and he directly takes them to Sheila, the spider, to kind of poison Frodo, and that was his plan to then take the ring. So I think his intentions are made quite clear that he's not to be trusted, and is really a murderous force in their lives.
I'll also say that again, it works out well because Tolkien's the author and he can effectively do whatever he wants. But like the risk is, okay, maybe he'll turn to good. Okay, and if he doesn't, he'll kill you, take the ring, Sauron will eventually get it, and then everyone loses. So it's nice. It's a nice idea, and it works out great because again, Tolkien's the author. But right, it seems like that's not necessarily the Jewish perspective.
Not 100%. Again, we'll just say a couple of things that will again show you the complication of this. There's a couple more nuances, probably many more sources than what we're sharing here in the short form. We know there's another famous story in the Talmud that the greatest sage that we have, he's considered the wisest of all sages, Rabbi Meir. He's been being harassed by hooligans. Again, we have to take each case again with its context. Harassment's not threatened with death. It's not harassed. And at a certain point, he gets home and says, okay, I wish that these people would die, these hooligans would die. And his wife chastises him and says, what? You're hoping that these hooligans will die? That's not what we hope for in life. What we hope for is that they should do tshuva, they should repent. And we don't want sinners to be killed. We want the sin to be eradicated from this world. And so the greatest sage is corrected by his brilliant wife, Bruria, about how to understand our perspective on mercy. We always want mercy for people. We don't have mercy for ideas. But again, we have a few questions on that. Who are these hooligans? Do they have an opportunity to do, it sounds like they're the type of people that just need education or can be uplifted. That's number one. We have a question with Gollum if that's true. Number two, is Rabbi Meir being threatened with death? Not so clear. So again, a slightly different scenario. But again, we have to make sure that we massage the point, because a lot of anti-Semitism stems from the idea that Judaism is a religion of law, a little bit heartless, all mental. It's not the case. That's an anti-Semitic trope. We have very, very merciful laws there in the Talmud of how far we have to go to be merciful, especially when it comes to capital crime cases. The Talmud famously says in Makot that a court that advocates for the death penalty once in 70 years would be considered a bloody court. That's too much, right? So we are very careful and judicious about when to apply the death penalty. A death penalty case, if it's a unanimous decision, it's thrown out. There has to be some disagreement. There has to be someone showing mercy or showing how this person who is being tried has some contextual factor that should really exonerate them. So again, we're super judicious of when to apply the death penalty. We're always looking for merciful aspects, for goodness somewhere, ways we can look at things in a different way. That being said, we also have to be practical and be very careful of, again, not allowing the truly wicked to thrive and survive and cause havoc in this world.
That makes sense. But I do have a couple of quotes that I want to bring up before we move on. Is I think you want to bring up like another incident. You said we had from like a historical example.
Yeah, I guess I want to bring up what's happening now, and I think this idea is so powerful now. Is that we know that the whole October 7th mastermind, Yahas Sinwar, is a classic example of the same idea from King Shaul, where he was in Israeli prison. He actually had a tumor that if left untreated, he would have died. And the Israelis, in their mercy and their love, even though he was a convicted terrorist who had tried to kill Jews, they saved his life. And eventually he was released in a Gilad Shalit deal. And, it doesn't take too long to get to where we are today, which is he created the October 7th massacre. So we lived and experienced this idea of misplaced mercy where we were too kind to a terrorist. And that's a tremendous mistake.
It is also, there are some like really devastating stories because there's also a lot of the people who lived on the border who were like butchered first almost, where people who drove into Gaza would pick up the sick and the elderly and whoever, bring them back over into the Israeli side, bring them to hospitals, and they're hoping through that to like promote unity and goodwill, and you see that we want to help you Gazans, and they were the first killed. Some of them were captured. It's
Great example where with that ideology, there's just so little hope for not everyone, but anyone who's really infected with the core of that ideology. There's a certain irredeemability to it that, it's unfortunate, but they have one thought on their minds, and that's to eradicate at least Israelis, and therefore Israelis have to tread very cautiously what kind of deals they make and what they can trust.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy stuff. It's almost easier to talk about the stuff that happened long ago, but when it touches your life, then it strikes a different tone. I want to discuss a very interesting quote, and I want to talk about what did Tolkien say? How do people react to it? And kind of see what the Jewish. I know we've probably, I think we've covered most of it, but I want to get this. I want to like almost hammer the nail in, so like we're more clear. So here's a quote I saw. So and this is from like a .edu article. I could share the link below. So Tolkien emphasizes in his letters that pity and mercy were essential to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It is the pity of Bilbo and later this is a quote. It is the pity of Bilbo and later Frodo that ultimately allows the quest to be achieved. Frodo and the cause were saved by mercy, by the supreme value and efficacy of pity and forgiveness of injury. The salvation of the world and Frodo's own salvation is achieved by his previous pity and forgiveness of injury. Because Frodo is consistently merciful, always sparing Gollum, he receives mercy and is spared at the moment of his final temptation at the crack of doom. At the very end, Frodo fails in his quest to destroy the ring, and Gollum becomes the means of Frodo's salvation. Tolkien would describe this event as eucatastrophe, a good catastrophe, the sudden joyous term representing a miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. So that's the quote, which is certainly interesting. Before I give two different responses to this from I guess the Hamon Am, the way fans would respond to this. Any quick comment on this?
This is the topic at hand, which is our job is not to rely on. In general, in Judaism, we don't rely on miracles. We always have to rely on our own discernment to make good, wise decisions. If a miracle occurs and God saves us despite our imperfections, great. That's not our job. And so, as you said, throughout, Tolkien's allowed to make things work out in a certain way. And so fine, it works out that, Gollum ends up being the vehicle for a certain type of salvation. That's certainly not something that we should anticipate, rely on in any meaningful way. So that would be my initial reaction.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. Here, so I'll read a couple of people different reactions, because again, this is like, as I was researching this, I'm like, this is like a really serious, deep topic about like when to do what. So this I found on, and I'm sure people have a good laugh, I found this on Reddit, but that is where the topics I want to cover, I want them to be real dilemmas. Some people, do people actually talk about this and argue it out? And you better believe that they do. So here are a couple different comments that I thought were really interesting. So one person who is pro this, who is like on Tolkien's side, this is harped on all the time, I'm sure, but the idea that Eru, like the deity in Lord of the Rings, used Frodo not as an instrument of providence to just get the ring from point A to point B, but as a way to use free acts of mercy with Smeagol to achieve a good end, i.e. salvation for Middle-earth, is insanely genius. Like a perfect use of divine providence in a story, in my opinion, works for any religion. But yeah, wild. Big shout out, works on a lot of levels. So that's one. Do you want me to read the second one, or do you want to respond to this first?
So again, that Frodo's goodness and kind of using his free choice was the ultimate God's will.
Yeah, it was like a perfect use of divine providence in a story. And he says, in my opinion, it works for any religion.
To some extent, I mean, certainly where you try to find the person of goodness to use their free will and to overcome power. But I guess again, as we spoke on the first podcast, did Frodo fail at the end or not? Did he lose his free will at the end? And then we need to have this twist at the end. It's a good question. But yeah, I guess in general, the quotes, I think it aligns to some extent.
Okay, cool. I mean, it's also because of like the example you gave with Yosef and the brothers in terms of, they threw Yosef in and then they allowed God to like determine should he live or should he die. He should live, and then it ended up being the salvation. So that I guess fine. I guess it works even for Judaism on a certain level, not on all levels, but in certain examples. Okay, cool. And then I personally prefer this quote.
Okay.
I'll give my bias immediately. So this guy is like a electrical throat 86. So here's what he says. To be quite honest, it feels like a massive contrivance. In real life, excessive mercy is more likely to get people hurt or let harm continue than somehow save the world at the last minute. Ask anyone who's been within a mile of an abusive relationship. Gollum gave Sam and Frodo every reason to think he would stab them in their sleep and take the ring. Since they had no way of containing him or keeping him away, killing him would have been the smart option. Maybe not what the Providence wanted, but smart given the information they had. You end up with this warped moral that you should keep bad people around so they can be your fall guy later or something. I'm not a Christian, and I genuinely hate this attitude that Christianity has instilled across the world, that you should turn the other cheek even towards someone who's knowingly and repeatedly doing you harm or threatening to.
Yeah, I think a little bit. Well, I think our largest message is very similar to that, which is exactly that, which we have to be smart in this world. I think that the Chafetz Chaim said, Tamim tiyeh lifnei Hashem. You have to be naive. He says, only be naive when it comes to your relationship with Hashem. But to other people, it's not a Jewish trait to be naive, and you have to be somewhat, again, we don't want to be suspicious of people, but we certainly have to have our eyes open and do what makes sense to do for our world. And to just be merciful and pitiful and be all loving towards certain types, it's a mistake.
That's great. Before we sign off, I guess two questions. First, any final thoughts? Anything that you think I should have asked or we should have brought up that we haven't yet?
Just the only final thought about this. The other aspect that people bring up about this is the idea that Frodo understood what the ring was doing to him and understood how difficult it was. And that really connected him to Gollum.
Oh, interesting. Right. As in, he wanted to see the ability to be redeemed.
Either the possibility of being redeemed and maybe that he wouldn't be stuck, or just the fact that he had like we said earlier, that even in a death penalty case, we do want to take context into account when we can. And, how much of this was really Gollum's fault? He stumbled upon the ring found him, he got corrupted by it, which it corrupts everybody, from Bilbo down to Frodo, down to whoever touches it. So it's not Gollum's fault, and therefore, it's like killing myself if I kill Gollum in a certain way. So I do think there is a extra layer of empathy that Frodo has, and maybe it's, as you said earlier beautifully, that maybe I can't kill Gollum because I have to know that I have to believe in there's some goodness left, and not what am I. And so I think that's an important thing to also bring in here, that there is a certain relatability between Frodo and Gollum that makes it extra complex to make that clear decision. Okay, I'm just going to end this person's life. I know it's not really his fault.
Wait, that actually is a really powerful point, because that almost seems like we understand the empathy, but it almost sounds like sometimes empathy can be dangerous. Is that a fair point?
I think unmitigated empathy is only to an extent. Again, that is why nothing in Judaism is straightforward. We know, for example, that you can only be a judge in the Jewish people if you have kids. Because you have to know what it means to raise another person. You need to know what it means for people to struggle. You have to know all these things about what it means to be a human being. And if you're just a judge who never had kids and is kind of just completely living in the abstract, it doesn't work.
There's a powerful point. But again, he still needs to pass the law. Just you need to understand where the person you're sentencing is coming from.
You have to understand where the people are coming from. And I think that's makes this particular case a little bit extra loaded. It's not just some vagabond that they found on the road and we're not sure if he's leading us in the right direction, not the wrong direction. It's a person that really understands what's going on, part of a deeper struggle.
And then I guess one other request, we started doing this last episode, was can we just get like a quick bullet point summary of the points we discussed, just so people listening can be like, oh, here are the takeaways?
Sure. So just the points that we discussed on this incredibly deep topic of mercy as a whole, or putting out good energy and assuming it's going to come back. If I'm just loving and kindness will come back in the universe at some point, is only partially a Jewish concept, and partially definitely not. There's so many cases in Jewish history that are very clear that when we were merciful on the cruel will be killing the merciful or inflicting pain on the merciful. And therefore, we have to be incredibly judicious about when we use our mercy. It has to be complete in the right context. We have to believe that the person we're using mercy on is capable of growth, capable of change. Obviously, if that's possible, we do prefer a merciful way of doing things. We also understand that sometimes we don't have all the answers, and therefore we have to leave it up to Hashem, like in the case of Yosef, of what to do. We're not sure. Are we biased in this case? And we have to we're not always we can't be the proper judge of everything. And still, that being said, we have a principle that's very clear that if someone's coming to kill you, you are certainly allowed to take their life. And in this case, does that fall in? Probably. I mean, it's clear. We know we know that Gollum ends up trying to kill them, either through starving them, to taking them to Shelob, to the spider. So this is clearly a case where there's reasonable information to say Gollum is trying to kill them, and therefore it makes sense to step in and kill him first. And so I think that's what's indicated overall. But that doesn't mean that we don't take mercy very seriously. There are many, many cases where mercy is important, critical, and is meant to be used as well.
Rabbi, thank you so much for that summary and presenting all these ideas.
All right, thank you for having me. As always fun to discuss. Two favorite subjects, Judaism, Lord of the Rings. Do it all day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish Perspective podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions for a moral dilemma you'd like analyzed, feel free to send it over. Thanks again, and see you next time.